You are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back to the Storm Tracker podcast. I'm Marcus Benjamin, representing CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all platforms. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Most importantly, subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com. Today, I've got Greg Smith joining me from Rivals.com, national recruiting analyst, to talk recruiting for the Hurricanes. Thanks for joining me today, Greg.
Hey, thanks, Marcus. I appreciate you having me, man. It's been an interesting time down in the state of Florida this year. I'm excited to kind of dive into some stuff happening down there.
Yeah, you're normally kind of like in the Midwest, and but you do have connections down here in the Southeast. What's it been like, kind of covering this area?
It's been interesting because between Florida and Georgia, there have just been an enormous amount of prospects and ground to cover, right? Which has been kind of different. It's more spread out in the Midwest, so coming down south has been kind of an eye-opening thing. It's been fun though. I like it a lot. The thing is I think it's an interesting time, like I mentioned, to be in Florida in particular and do stuff down there because of the big three and kind of where they are recruiting wise right now and how each of them have kind of taken steps forward. I guess Miami and Florida have kind of had their kind of ups and downs this season. Florida State has been kind of riding high, but to see all of them kind of battling out for kind of top 10 recruiting classes this year, which is something that every one of those big three should be doing on a yearly basis, given the talent base down there. It's an interesting time to come in and do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the big three, they hate each other,
right?
That's a fact. And, they battle on the field and they battle in recruiting. So since you brought that up, man, let's talk about the big three and Miami's chances of maybe finishing on top as far as recruiting. Right now, they're sitting third place among the big three. Plenty of recruits still out there. What are the chances, do you think, that Miami finishes in first place?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that there is a chance for that, and it's going to come off of the back of kind of flips and decommitments always, which is what we've kind of seen, which is why this race has been so fascinating to watch, because as about a month ago, it was a little different than it is right now after some of the recent news that happened. And so I don't think that we're done seeing kind of that jostling and shuffling. I think that if Miami can flip a couple guys back, if they can have some decommitments from the other teams, because one of the other things too, as it relates to that is, it's not just about who you gain, it's who the other teams lose, right? So there's a lot of players that, are attempting to be poached from that Florida class from other teams, and you see it all over the place. And so if some teams can be successful at that, that helps Miami. If Miami obviously can grab some guys back, there's a lot out there still, like you mentioned, for them to kind of close this class. The game this weekend didn't necessarily hurt or help, but they can still get the thing in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, last year they finished 5-7. It was one of the worst seasons in recent memory for the Miami Hurricanes. Yet they were still able to complete the 8th ranked class, which was pretty amazing. Right now they sit at 12. Florida is 4th, and Florida State is 3rd. I hate to bring up a subject because I try to stay away from this subject right now, but I feel like we have to. There's a situation where Miami could flip back Armondo Blount. Well, what's your take on that situation and the chances of Miami doing that?
Yeah, it's a wild one, man. Anytime, you have one of these like big time recruitments, and you guys know this down there, like they go back and forth, it's sideways one way, somebody's telling you this is absolutely going to go one way, and the next minute you get totally shocked and it's not right. That's the nature of the beast with these big time recruitments that end up going to the wire. I do think that this will be one when we're sitting around doing like national, like early signing day Sunday shows and that sort of stuff. He's going to be somebody that we're watching to see whether or not he flips back to Miami. Those relationships just don't go away, right? And he's got strong relationships down there in Coral Gables. And so you never know how they can then kind of work that to get him back in the fold. It's 2023 recruiting, so NIL will come into play as it tends to do at this time as well. So you just have to see. I think that it would not be shocking if he flipped back to Miami. And he's just an interesting recruit because he's not only a great player on the defensive line and somebody that is kind of a cornerstone player that every team wants. The fact that he then moved up a class and reclassified from 25 to 24 because he's been playing football at the varsity level since the 8th grade. This is actually his 4th year of varsity football, and he's going to early enroll, right? And so whichever school he then picks at signing day, he wants to be off to that school right after that. So there's going to be a lot of intrigue to see exactly where that fax comes in on signing day, but I wouldn't count out the Canes just yet.
Yeah, you can never count out the Canes and Mario Cristobal and his staff. He's just an elite recruiter. So that will definitely be an interesting one down to the end here once we get to signing day. Miami's looking to flip a ton of targets, though. I mean, that there's a bunch of players out there from anywhere from Jeremiah Smith has been mentioned. Lorraine McCoy has been mentioned as a flip target. What players do you think Miami has the best chance of possibly flipping to its 2024 class?
Yeah, I think one of the guys that I have a big eye on is Jordan Lyle, the running back that's committed to Ohio State. I think that he's a kid that Miami would really like, and if they do like, and would love to have him in the class. And if they can pull that off, then they've got a really good running back class brewing up to kind of get that running game, continue that running game rolling. I'm glad you mentioned Jeremiah Smith. I feel like that's something that everyone has been talking about for the entire recruiting cycle, even though he's committed to Ohio State. I think he was at Florida this past weekend for their game. And I feel like it's also been the kiss of death. It feels like wherever he shows up, that team loses. And so I'm sure these teams are a little upset about that happening every time he goes to one of their games. But I think that he's still in play with Miami. That's one we're talking about. We're joking about kind of, guys we're watching on the signing day special. Like, he'll definitely be one. Make sure that the fax actually goes to Columbus and not to somewhere in Florida, because that one in particular to me goes back to something else that we talked about earlier in the show about the big three in Florida and their ability to kind of rise up right now, is that it makes it really difficult for some of these kids to then leave the state, even when they're, as Jeremiah is committed to Ohio State, who has been a wide receiver factory. That is still difficult to then ultimately make that decision in the end. But no, I think flip watch is going to be really important for Miami here down the stretch. And it'll be if they're able to then get back into that top 10 of the recruiting rankings, or able to kind of overtake Florida and Miami for the state championship of recruiting, that's going to be a big part why.
Yeah, absolutely. We're watching highlights here from Jordan Lyle, definitely a flip target from Ohio State. Miami is trying to flip him, Jeremiah Smith. And I also want to mention Chris Ewald is definitely a possibility for the 2025 class, flipping to Miami. Miami's already, of course, has Zaquan Patterson and Josiah Trader committed from Chaminade Madonna High School down here in Hollywood, Florida. So Chris Ewald seems like maybe the next domino to fall from that school. And if that happens, then I think they have an even better chance to get Jeremiah Smith. So it's definitely going to be interesting down the stretch, because we're in flip season, Greg.
Oh, yeah.
So it's going to happen. They're going to be flipping like flapjack soon.
Right, that's right. We're in that time of year, and it's just gonna get wild. Like, which is, for us, right? This is the fun time, right? Like, sometimes it can cause some long days and some sleepless nights, but this is the fun time for us, right? Because this is where business really picks up.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had a chance to kind of visit North Florida and South Georgia. What's the buzz with Miami with some of the recruits that you talked with?
Yeah, I think that there's pretty good buzz there, and I think that it kind of goes back to what we were talking about the teams like Miami and the state kind of making their move and showing like competency on the field, and in Miami's case in particular, obviously Mario Cristobal and his staff's ability to recruit. So, for example, another wide receiver, Jaime Ffrench, that is committed to a big time program in Alabama, 2025 receiver out of Mandarin High School. I saw him play. He was fantastic in that game, elite agility, and just a fantastic playmaker. He mentioned to me that, you know, as the Florida schools turn up the heat, it is really hard to envision himself leaving the state, even though Alabama is right there and Alabama is who they are. Like, you know, that ends up being really difficult because they've been playing better and those staffs have been recruiting these players harder. And that's something that to me has been the buzz that I heard about Miami too, is that they're recruiting me harder, right? And I think that that's something that's really interesting to note as we go forward. Is that I know that you've talked about this plenty about Mario Cristobal, him and his staff, and about how good of recruiters they are, but also it is well known about just how hard they get after it on the trail. And I think that that's something that I heard consistently down while I was in Florida and in South Georgia with some of those prospects too.
Awesome. Jaime Ffrench is a player that I love as well. Yeah. Outstanding talent. But Miami, let's talk about their class. You know, they have I think they're up to 25 commits at this point. They just added a huge JUCO offensive tackle in Markel Bell. I don't know if you had a chance to kind of see his tape or anything like that, but who are some of the standouts from this 2024 class that you like, or that you think could probably make an immediate impact in the 2024 season?
Yeah, you know, a couple of guys, man, there's a few guys in this class that I really like, actually. Booker Pickett is a guy that I feel like is going to have a role fairly early. Like he may not be at his current weight an every down, like kind of edge guy or defensive end, but he can have a package where he can go in there and get after the passer. He's been a sack specialist in high school. I think that can translate right away. It can be a guy that can help you. You know, you mentioned Zaquan Patterson. Anytime you get a 5-star on campus, you want to see him get out there early, and he's definitely got the skills to be able to do that. Nye Carr, you know, so speaking of flips, that was an early flip season situation, right? Getting him off of Georgia. I think the receivers, I think a lot of times you're able to kind of get them involved, especially when they show that talent early. He's another guy that I like in this class. Another guy too, go back to my Midwest situation, Marquise Lightfoot, the defensive end out of Chicago. I really like him, and I thought that Miami got kind of a steal reaching up into the Midwest to grab him from up there. And he's a kid that to me kind of embodies what you need to be able to do and the type of guys that you need to be able to stack on top of each other when you're talking about winning at the line of scrimmage, right? When we talk about teams, you know, kind of making a resurgence and coming back. Like I know we talk a lot about skill guys, we talk a lot about quarterbacks, but if you're going to really make hay and do some damage, you got to do it up front. And I think that the defensive line class that Miami has put together, Lightfoot included, is something that I really, really like.
Awesome. Yeah, I think they stacked a bunch of defensive ends in this class, and they've had success with defensive ends. Ruben Bain has been tearing it up on the college gridiron. So I think these recruits see that, and they're like, okay, well, I can perform as well as a freshman. So let me commit to Miami. So Miami definitely doing well in that regard. Before I let you go here, I wanted to ask you about just how this class ends up for Miami, the 24 class. You know, like I said before, they're right now sitting at 12. Miami's got a 6-3 record right now, but like I said last year, probably doesn't matter too much because I think the kids know that the program is still building towards the future. Cristobal has maybe 1.5, I guess you could say, classes under his belt. So this would be the third, so to speak, or 2.5, I guess. So how do you think this class kind of ends up as far as ranking wise? Do you think they end up in the top 10?
Yeah, what's interesting too about what you said about, you know, that players understand that they're building for the future. I think that that's something that I feel like I'm always telling fans, that the recruits actually take a much bigger picture view of things than I think people give them credit for a lot of times, to be honest. And that when you say that, hey, they were under 500 last season, but this season they're above 500. They've had a couple of, you know, kind of iffy losses, but on the whole, that's an upward trajectory, right? You can sell that. That's why I think that they're going to end up in the top 10 of recruiting rankings, because you can legitimately say, if you're Mario Cristobal, you can sit in the living room and you can say, we were under 500. We're now above 500. They're going to go to a bowl game. We get that situation figured out. We just need a couple more of you guys to come in here. We're also, a key thing that you mentioned too, and I really like this. I'm glad you brought it up. Playing guys early. Like, Miami has done a really nice job this year playing guys early, getting them on the field. That can really help you when you're trying to get these blue chip guys into your program, especially late here and trying to flip them. I think Miami ends up getting in the top 10. We'll see about if they can win the state of Florida recruiting battle. That was going to be difficult. It might end up falling on which team, if any, Jeremiah Smith flips to, and if they can flip Armando Blount back. But I think that they will be in the top 10 when it's all said and done at the end of this year, which would be a really another good class, because anytime you stack top 10 classes on top of each other and you show progress on the field, that I think is a recipe for some future success for Mario Cristobal and his staff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Miami's definitely trending in the right direction when it comes to recruiting. And if they continue to stack classes, maybe they get into the college football playoff in the future. So that's going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. Thank you, Greg Smith, for joining me, national recruiting analyst for Rivals.com. Make sure you visit Rivals.com for more stuff from Greg. Also visit CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Until the next episode.